Hi, my name is James Wood, and for my presentation today I am covering the life and death of the Arecibo telescope, which you can find in Puerto Rico. So I chose this topic because I personally have an interest in air and space, and I figure telescope really kind of fits in that same kind of niche, and I personally, I was following the events that I will be covering in this presentation as they were happening in the year 2020. We'll see that it kind of covers the entirety of the last 6 months of the year. So it was kind of interesting that I got to see and read some articles as the events actually took place. I feel like that gave me a well-founded understanding of what happened and what happens in this presentation and what led up to the destruction of the telescope. So the Arecibo telescope, just to cover some of our bases, it was built in 1963 by the U.S. government. It was actually the largest telescope in the world for almost its entirety for the existence of the telescope. The only time it was beat was back in the early 2000s when a Chinese satellite that was a little bit bigger was constructed. It actually continued to be useful to the scientific community for the entire lifespan of the telescope, just almost due to the sheer size and location of the telescope. So it was really being used up until its destruction. And it is well known in the general public just due to many movies actually using it as a set piece or location, as you can see, including some well-known things like The X-Files and GoldenEye. So over the Arecibo's career, as we can see, we're going to cover some of the origins of the telescope, some of the modifications that were made. I'm also going to cover a large aspect of the failure of the telescope and the legacy that the telescope leaves behind. So it was originally built in 1963 by the U.S. government. It was used for missile defense during the Cold War due to the strategic location of Puerto Rico. And it was actually taken over by the NCF, National Science Foundation, in 1969 and repurposed as a telescope. So some of the modifications that the NCF actually conducted on the telescope involved replacing the wire mesh of the actual telescope of the disc with aluminum, which helped the reflection of radio waves. They also added more powerful radio transmitters, which actually increased the frequencies that they could pick up with the telescope, and they added a Gregorian dome on it, which helped focus the telescope. So August 2020 was when the telescope initially failed. So the first cable on one of the support towers actually snapped as a scientist was using it to view a distant black hole, and engineers actually, over the course of a few months, 3 different engineering teams tried to analyze the situation and repair the telescope. But unfortunately, in the very first of December in 2020, the last of the remaining cables on Tower 4 actually all snapped within a few seconds, and the whole telescope was destroyed in the process. The observation deck that holds the Gregorian dome actually fell into the rim of the disk. So some of the design faults that led up to the destruction include the weight of the Gregorian dome was not well dealt with additional cables added to the support towers. Some of the joints in the support towers were actually poorly maintained and poorly installed. The humid climate of Puerto Rico, along with some of the severe weather that happened recently, being hurricanes and tornadoes, actually impacted. And with a combination of poor maintenance, the cables themselves actually decayed on the inside and unfortunately snapped. So for the future of the site, there were actually many different proposals brought forth to replace the telescope. One of them being a quite ambitious proposal of replacing the whole disk with one flat area in which they could put 1,000 9-meter disks on that platform, and that platform should actually theoretically be able to raise 45 degrees in any direction. And it's actually currently up to the U.S. government whether or not any of these plans will actually be executed. So some of the main takeaways I want you to come away from this presentation is that the telescope was actually never really supposed to be a telescope when it was originally designed. It was retrofitted multiple times, so it really stayed relevant due to those improved technical modifications that the telescope underwent. And the destruction of the telescope was actually a very large, significant event to the scientific community. Thank you.